when was Katie first diagnosed? When did you notice?
When she was about 6, the middle school that she was in, one of the teachers pulled us aside and said that she thought she might have autism. And then about 8 months after, she was diagnosed with Asperger's.
It took a while, didn't it?
It did, yeah. We had to see a lot of people, a lot of psychotherapists, because first of all, they wouldn't determine what she had. And Asperger's is quite rare in girls.
What were you noticing?
Well, when I used to pick her up from school, I used to get called in a lot. She was quite disruptive. She couldn't make friends very easy. And it was that way pretty much for the whole time before she got statemented. She was sort of seen as the naughty girl in the class. But once she got the diagnosis, they were able to give her the help that she needed.
How did you take the news?
I think I cried for a week. Feel a bit guilty. You know, was it my fault that she has this condition? And at the time, there was nowhere to research that I knew of. Girls with autism, everything was related to boys. But now Limpsfield have brought out a book, Emma's for Autism, and it's from a girl's perspective, which is amazing. So I think for people like myself or mums with girls with Asperger's, it's like a reference and you can relate to it a lot more.
We'll talk about Limpsfield in just a moment, because I know that you say discovering it was like winning the lottery.
It was.
But how do you feel? How do you feel being here today?
I'm nervous, to be honest.
Are you?
Yeah.
But I think most people are that sit on that sofa.
I think everybody is.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I just don't like to see myself. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, well, I say that all the time. When I look on there, I think, oh no, not him again.
It's me.
And how do you feel when you're around people?
Sometimes I feel quite crowded, but if it's like people I know, I'm alright, because I know what I'm expecting with them. But if it's like, sometimes if it's boys, I get a bit obsessive and I stare at them and stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes I fancy boys.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
And then I talk about them a lot.
Well, you actually.
You do have a boyfriend.
If you text the boys, sometimes you're not quite sure how many times you should text them.
No, I don't, because there was actually once when I had this boyfriend called Ben, and I'd sent him 72 texts in one day.
Right,
wow.
That's quite a lot.
I know.
No, it wasn't a day, it was an hour.
It was in an hour, was it?
Yeah.
Gosh, your thumbs must have been really working very, very hard.
I get a bit too obsessed.
An Oregon family traveling with a 15-year-old girl with autism was kicked off a United Airlines flight this week for what the airline calls a disruptive situation. The family calls it an outrage. Here's Carter Evans.
Video from a passenger shows Salt Lake City Airport police removing an autistic teen and her family from a United Airlines flight last Tuesday after the pilot made an emergency landing. The girl's mother, Donna Beagle, was shocked when officers explained why.
He said, well, the captain doesn't feel comfortable flying to Portland with your daughter on his flight.
Beagle says her 15-year-old autistic daughter Juliet was hungry, and when she acts up, this is how she expresses frustration.
You sound frustrated? I know her, when she gets over hungry or over thirsty, she really struggles.
Her mother says Juliet is a picky eater, and after asking a flight attendant if she could purchase a hot meal from first class, she was told no.
And I said, well, how about if we wait for her to have a meltdown, and then she's crying and tries to scratch, and then you'll want to help her.
She eventually got the meal and said Juliet calmed down. Then came an announcement from the captain.
We were shocked to hear him say, we're going to make an emergency landing in Salt Lake City. We have a passenger in the back of the plane who has behavior issues.
In a statement, United Airlines said the crew made the best decision for the safety and comfort of all of our customers and elected to divert to Salt Lake City after the situation became disruptive. Passenger Marilyn Headland says it was the right decision.
She wasn't put off the plane because she had autism. She was put off the plane because she was maybe proposing some kind of a threat at 36,000 feet, which, you know, doesn't make anybody feel safe.
But as Juliet and her family were removed from the flight, other passengers seemed surprised.
That's going to be a lawsuit. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Donna Beagle says that lawsuit is already in the works.
Asperger syndrome is not a learning disability, and it has features of autism spectrum disorder, nonverbal learning disabilities, ADHD. So let's talk about Asperger syndrome in the context of the domains within which some of those characteristics occur. In the social interaction domain, individuals with Asperger syndrome tend to have limited and sometimes inappropriate kinds of behaviors in the social interaction domain. They have difficulties with nonverbal communication. So for example, they have a hard time reading gestures or facial expressions, and sometimes their gestures and facial expressions don't communicate what it is that they're thinking and feeling. They often have difficulties understanding emotional cues, so they miscue when listening to someone or watching somebody. They may then say something inappropriate, or they may repeat something that isn't appropriate to the situation because they're misreading the social aspect of the situation or the emotional aspect of the situation. Individuals with Asperger's are often seen to have low eye contact, either not making good eye contact or sustaining good eye contact. And in this social interaction domain, those with Asperger's tend also to be at risk for not having many friends. They tend to be socially isolated. Those with Asperger's often are extremely verbal, highly verbal, and their language can be very sophisticated at times. What they do when they're talking is that they tend to discuss themselves and their interests and not focus on the interests of others. It can be a one-sided conversation, and some of that reciprocity, the flow, the reciprocal flow between one person and another can be awkward. They tend to be literal in the ways that they understand language. So for example, I was with somebody with Asperger syndrome and I was to say, "Get out of here." They might physically They may think that it means that I want them to get up and physically move away, as opposed to, "Get out of here. That's just so terrific. I can't believe that that just happened." There's this literal component to the way they understand language, and that tends to be very difficult for many individuals with Asperger's. The ways that they use their voice, both the tone of their voice, the pitch of their voice when they're speaking, and the way that they modulate the volume of their voice can be problematic. But as mentioned before, those with Asperger's tend to be very sophisticated in terms of the language that they use. You can almost think of them as quirks, quirky kinds of behaviors. In the same way that individuals on the autism spectrum disorder are fascinated and focused on pieces or things, in an expanded kind of a way, those with Asperger's tend to focus on, or many have particular interests in unusual objects or topics. So they may memorize the map of a subway system, or they may be fascinated by the specifics of what constitutes the decorative ironwork on bridges. They focus on those kinds of peculiarities and they run with them and they become quite expert at them. They exhibit often awkward body language, their posture and their movement. They don't often know what they do with their hands. They stand in a funny kind of a way. They may have posture difficulties or present differently in social situations that are awkward. Individuals with Asperger's are also at times bothered by noise or by lights or by certain textures or intense kinds of taste. They tend to have difficulties often in areas of motor coordination. So sports can be an area of difficulty. Many individuals with autism do really well in individual sports and not so well in team sports. And they tend sometimes to have difficulties not just with the coordination or the rules or the following of the interactive nature of sports, but also with balance and muscle control. Individuals with Asperger syndrome will struggle often with routines or changes in routines. They have difficulties in transition periods, moving from one activity to another. They are known often to have difficulties with the physical act of writing, the handwriting process, the motor control needed to do written expression. Those with Asperger syndrome are almost always of at least average intelligence, and they can certainly demonstrate characteristics of giftedness. As I mentioned earlier, Asperger's often manifests itself in features of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Anxiety becomes an issue at certain points with individuals with Asperger's, as does depression, and that needs to be looked at carefully and monitored carefully. They may have some savant-like qualities, as might those in the autism spectrum disorder category.